our first speaker. He is Andrew Jeavons. Andrew is the president of Survey Analytics. He has a marketing research background. He started, I don't know if you are familiar with Quantime. Yeah, but you was part of that, and who know who is Quantime is we know that he's a brilliant guy that helped us in our industry. He gets experience in statistics, but he also has a background in neuropsychology and psychology. And I'm sure that he's going to give you a nice perspective, talking about lies today, what lies beneath, and please give an applause for him.
Is this on? Oh, good, it's on. Thanks, everybody. I'm delighted to be in Brazil. I apologize that I don't speak Portuguese. There are people say that I don't speak proper English, so Portuguese is a bit beyond my limits. As the introduction implied, I'm a bit of a mutt, a mongrel, a mixture. I started off in psychology, which is great, but I couldn't eat. And it came to the point where I needed a job that actually could buy cat food and other necessities of life. So I drifted strangely into survey software and statistics. So my perspective on these things is drawn from my abiding interest in psychology and the fact that I'm also deeply interested in technology. And it's nice to be able to stand up and talk about technology. For so many years, it was kind of a dirty word at these conferences. It's like, yeah, it's a tech, but it's not really relevant. But of course, when we look at the world today, all that's changed. Does that work? No? Oh, right. I'm going to talk about mobile phones and smartphones, which are increasingly taking over. When I was sitting in the other session, I and a lot of other people were playing with our phones and getting messages and all that kind of stuff. They just become a part of our life. But we can't really call them telephones. I mean, that was a telephone, that boxy thing. We've got these extremely powerful computers that we carry around with us. I've got enough grey hair, and as you'll notice, I'm sufficiently old to remember the darker days of computing, where computers literally took up a room. The first real computer I worked with took up a small room. And the phone that I carry around now has, I think it's 1,000 times more memory than it had. The processor is probably 1,000 times more powerful. And this trend to me is just amazing, that we now have got beyond the whole concept of a personal computer. I don't know what to call them, it's part of our lives. And what we have to remember is these things are extremely powerful. This is where, and I think this is quite true, a lot of us live. We live with our phones. This is a selection of things that I had running on my phone that I decided to show. I was looking up a restaurant. I was reading my favorite tech site, The Verge. For some reason, I've been trying to identify a song with this app called Shazam. My favorite app is the one that allows me to control the temperature of my house from my phone, which is the one down in the middle called Nest. And it's really good to be able to do that. And it's really pretty amazing, because I can do that from here. I can change the thermostat. I can scan barcodes. I can find out where I am. It turns out I was actually at home. And this is where consumers will live in the future, and indeed many people are. And I'm sure a lot of you use your smartphones for transactions. My apologies, this says nearly half of all American adults. It should say North American adults. We're in South America. I don't mean to classify. I'm trying to be culturally sensitive. It's a new concept for me. Smartphones are particularly popular with young adults. At the moment, I tend to look at what teenagers are doing, because I've got a teenager, which you'll see later on, and I'm actually survived that process. And really the teenagers are the adults of tomorrow. That's it. What they are doing sets the future. And they are basically obsessed with smartphones. They want them. I mean, feature phones don't mean anything anymore. They want smartphones. When you look at these devices that we're carrying around, they do a lot. a lot that you really don't see. And this is what I'm going to talk about a little bit about passive data. That is data that we can collect from these phones that we're carrying around and sitting around with without us really realizing it. And there are some privacy issues that I'll talk about later on, perhaps. But you've got to remember that these phones, they're not phones, they're computers. This is a display you can get from an app showing what's going on your iPhone. And to me, this looks exactly the same kind of thing as I see on my laptop. Same concept. You could probably use these phones to write Word documents if you could just get the right apps. Certainly when we look at iPads, you can use those to do a lot. These are extremely powerful machines, and they have a lot of information in them, and they can do a lot more than you would realize. This is just a list of the kind of information that we can get off a smartphone. A little while back, I read a great article in the New Yorker magazine. I don't know if any of you have seen that. It's a really good magazine. And it was an article about bacteria. And it was all about how really we cannot survive without all this bacteria that we carry around. And how biologists and doctors were now beginning to rethink the way the body works in relation to these bacteria. And they came up with the term the biodome of the person. This is the whole environment of the person, of the bacteria and the physical and the actual physical systems, physiological systems. And I, trying to make up words and being inventive and all that stuff, came up with TechDome, the consumer's digital environment, the world that you live in. And I think it's important to take a holistic view. So often tech is split off from people and seen as separate, but it isn't. And when I look at my teenagers and how they act with technology, it's just an integral part of their life. I mean, you know, the whole thing about you are not allowed to text at the dinner table becomes really important. But, you know, they go to bed with this technology, they wake up with it, and that's the way the future's going to be. And you have to take a holistic view of it. Going back to psychology, there was a German psychological concept called Gestalt, which said that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And what that's trying to say is the interaction between the parts of any system produce something different. And so we have an interaction between our technical environment and the way we live. And it's really, you've got to look at it in a holistic view. It's really very new. And to me, being old, essentially, and having seen technology evolve, it's very exciting to me to see how it's now really integrated into people's lives. That's my daughter buying a handbag. And this wasn't set up, this was something that she did naturally. I like the way she can hold the credit card with her fingers like that and still text. It's pretty cool. So she can type and see the numbers and go there. But this is becoming normal. For her, this is a perfectly reasonable way of operating. It's a wholly integrated part of her life. And because of that, it's important for us to pay attention to that technical environment that she's got on the phone, which is what we're talking about here with the TechDome. I'm just going to switch a little and say one thing about mobile surveys, because of course these are increasingly important. People are living with smartphones, they're using them for commerce, they're using them for everything, and we want to survey them. But it's a different environment. We can't ask, thankfully, very long surveys. We can't have those big grids that researchers love so much but are really useless. I'm sorry, I've got to say it. Don't do it. We came up with a kind of concept of 10, 7, 140. For a mobile survey, 10 questions is good. It's about all you're going to get them to do. Don't have more than 7 options on the question because it just means scrolling and people really hate that. 140 characters, stole from Twitter, for the question text. You've got to be short. But the important thing is you've got to know when to ask these things. I decided to emphasize or look at one part of the data set that you can collect from these smartphones. And this is stuff called accelerometer. And it essentially means movement. And you know when you turn your phone sideways, well, the screen magically twists over and you can see it. Well, it's all got all these sensors in it which tell you what's going on. And you can tell, you know, the kinds of movements that people are making second by second. you get a lot of data. And when we first did this, we were pretty concerned that we wouldn't be able to store this data, that we'd have a lot of problems with it. But it turned out that it doesn't matter. These machines, these smartphones are so powerful, they have so much memory, the big data thing went away. And of course, on the other end, when we tried to report on it, again, we were worried about that, but then again, that turned out not to be true. The systems we have these days, it's pretty easy to do this stuff. And to me, that was a surprise. We really didn't expect that. But it just brought home to me the power of these machines that we carry around. So an example here is tracking somebody for about, I think that's about 6 hours of movement data. And we were able to check every second of that 6 hours how much somebody was moving. And I happened to know what was going on, so we can see that the guy got up, he had breakfast, just over there on the left, and then he was at work, put his phone down, hopefully, he's supposed to be working, had lunch. We think a couple of the little blips there are him going to the bathroom, not too sure, but, you know, could be that. And then later on, he went into a store. And you can see the movement, the kind of movement he was making in the store. One of the things that we can do, therefore, is just to be able to say, okay, with GPS, know when somebody's going into a store, and then track how they, the kinds of ranges of movement they meet around the store. Now, to a great extent, this kind of data is a solution looking for a problem. We're not quite sure what to do with it yet. We're sure that somebody will come along and realize that it's important. But I'd be very interested if any of you have applications for it, because it's really amazing. This is just a small example of a lot of other stuff that we can collect. We can also collect data about Wi-Fi connection. You know, what were they doing? Well, here we see on the bottom the amount of data that's going out on his Wi-Fi, and it really drops at one point, and that's because he was out of range of Wi-Fi, we knew, and so he was using something different. He was using the 4G connectivity. We can audit apps. We can find out what apps are running on the phone wherever you are. So if you do go into a store or mall, it's possible to find out what apps people are running, perhaps get some insight if they're using apps like Shop Savvy, which are for getting a better price on a product by collecting the barcode. This particular app, I don't know if any of you have ever used it, it's called Evernote. It's really great. It's a note-taking app. You can put notes on any machine, if it's your iPad or your smartphone or anything like that, and it will synchronize them all, so wherever you are, you've got those notes. And I use it quite a lot because I constantly forget things, and it's great to be in the store and pull up Evernote and be able to look at my shopping list. Here we can see he was using Evernote at home because we know that the network ID there is Zombieland. America is obsessed with zombies currently. I don't really get that, but here we go. We know that the dev notation means he was not using 4G and he was outside. And we can also, on some systems, you can work out what apps are installed on the machine. I believe we can do that on Android. And certainly you can find out what applications are running at the time. And I think this is going to be very interesting in the future to see, you know, we can tell when people go into a store or into any sort of environment what kind of apps they have running. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're interacting with them, but it's information in of itself. I'm going to talk a little bit now about psychology. I don't know how many of you have heard of this guy called Daniel Kahneman. He was the only psychologist to ever receive a Nobel Prize. They had to give it to him for economics, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. He talked about thinking slow, thinking fast. System 1, System 2, recall. Now, the fast things, he said, are the things you do in everyday life. the way you live. You have to make very fast decisions. And very often, consumers are living that way. You make a fast decision. What we need to be able to do, and what smartphones give us, is the opportunity to be there at that point of decision. We've got to know when to ask the questions. You know, the whole recall thing of, well, you know, how many times did you go to the store last week? I don't know. I could find out with the smartphone app. I can track where people go. And you can actually then ask them the questions in the store, which is really important, because when you're asking questions 2 days later, 3 hours later, people don't remember what's going on. So this interaction between having this highly capable little machine with us gives us the opportunity to get much more accurate information about the consumer. One final point is privacy. I think the conceptions of what is private is changing. If you had said 10 or 15 years ago, we can collect all this data, we can know where you are, we can do all this kind of stuff, there would have been much more outcry. But now it seems that the privacy debate is really dying down. I'd be interested if people have any comments about that. Certainly when I talk to the teenagers, they don't care. It's not a question, it's not on their radar. It's just the way life is. Thanks for your time.